In the video game essayist vernacular, the term dead game has become very popular. Whether it be to describe your favorite multiplayer title as being dead because it has only 10k people online, or explaining how a single-player game that has not had an update in 15 years is now abandoned. People like to describe things as dead when they analyze them. Maybe it makes them appear as an explorer of sorts, a digital one, because there are no more physical places to explore anymore. There is a suburban development in its place now. Anyway, the quantification on what actually is dead is played fast and loose. What it actually means, who is to say? While a game can certainly die, one thing that may be even more difficult to say is whether a whole genre is dead. If Call of Duty dies, first-person shooter players will always have another game to whore out their time on. The genre will not die. There is one genre, however, that I can say with absolute certainty does not have any new titles coming out. And in fact, there are so few titles coming out, and by that I mean none, that I can say with a reasonable degree of certainty that it is a dead genre. Not just a game, no, genre. Single-player arcade flying games. Should you get in your head that you want to play the newest flying game in a single-player focus, well, you should out of luck. Ace Combat 7 came out in 2019, and while it is a game that you should play, that is the most recent arcade flying game I can think of that has come out, outside of Star Wars Squadrons, if you stretch it to outer space. Outside of that, there has been basically no substantial flying games out of the arcade type to satisfy a single-player desire. No. The desire to fly planes in a game setting, period, has been dominated by multiplayer flying games. Titles designed for people who want to fly realistic aircraft, but decide that they need to be unhappy doing so, where their unhappiness is only worsened by even more miserable people who spend real money on broken planes to win. I cannot believe I spent 200 hours on this shit. Waste my goddamn time. Arcade flying games are mostly deserted field of nothingness, but with a scarecrow in the middle of maybe two games that everyone clings to because there is an assumption that there is nothing else. Fact of the matter is, if you lust for a single-player flying game, you better look elsewhere than Steam, because the doofy-ass War Thunder single-player missions ain't worth shit, and I am not playing your niche simulator that you say is easy for beginners. The video game topic of this video, which I shall reminisce about and look over, is the flying game you can play with but one controller stick. Actual arcade flying game, easy to pick up with a pad, God's one true peripheral. And what better way to start than with my favorite, Crimson Skies?
Well, after all the hospitality he's shown us, I'd better not keep him waiting.
When the corporate snake in the grass known as Phil Spencer announced that the original Xbox games were coming to the worst console ever released via backwards compatibility, the first one he said that was coming back was Crimson Skies, High Road to Revenge. He said the community was asking for it, and when the reveal was made, the crowd cheered. With good reason. Crimson Skies is, objectively, in the top 10 games on the OG Xbox. Not arguable, non-removable. Why is it a top 10 game? Because it is fun, obviously. But it would be reductive of me to state that as the only reason Crimson Skies is looked at so fondly. No. Crimson Skies is considered one of the best original Xbox games for a multitude of reasons. One of which is certainly how the game not only puts the player into the seat of a dogfighting aircraft, but gives the player the tools to actually have fun with said dogfights. From the moment the game loads up, the controls are easy to comprehend. One stick controls all the aircraft rudders. The second stick controls the roll, but that's not necessary. Every aircraft feels different, and every craft has a different quirk or secondary fire to play around with. The beginner aircraft, the Devastator, is an all-arounder with fast machine guns and a powerful rocket. The Bulldog is incredibly fast, but with no armor, but has a shotgun secondary fire, meaning you can close gaps fast and blast opponents with pellets of fury. A later aircraft, the Brigand, is a big, heavy thing, but with big machine guns and a rear-facing turret that you can swap to at any time. Crimson Skies is not a realistic game, in neither its flight model or the functionality of its aircraft. Many of them would probably struggle to get off the ground if designed in reality. A variety of asymmetrical planes, absurd positions of engines, very small rudders matched with very large fuselages. Hell, all of them are air-launchable via a Zeppelin. Ridiculous from a craft design standpoint, but Crimson Skies is not attempting to even place itself as a past form of our own reality, so it's a moot point. In fact, the environmental and lore of Crimson Skies is equally as interesting as the aircraft itself. Taking place in an alternate diesel-punk 1930s a la Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, the Crimson Skies universe sees the United States effectively balkanized into different factions, broken up by disease, economic factors, as well as prohibition. This creates an unusual scenario where air travel is the dominant form of transportation, and sky pirates traveling via hokey planes and zeppelins rule the sky. I do not want to get too much into the weeds of Crimson Skies lore, as there is an entire rulebook for its associated board game that covers such things. But, suffice to say, the inevitable factions and their beliefs are incredibly interesting to speak of. California becomes the nation of Hollywood, becoming the antagonist of the former state of New York, now the capital of the Empire States. Texas does what it always wanted to do and becomes its own republic, bordered by former Midwest states that have decided socialism is the purest form of Christianity and thus is communist in its governance. Louisiana is but a French-run colony state, bordered by the Confederation of Dixie, which is not actually what it sounds like, as it's totally just a coalition of states who enjoy their rights this time, for realsies. This is the world of Crimson Skies, and although it is unfortunate that these environments are not at all explored, the fact that such a world exists is what makes Crimson Skies an enticing game to play. A suspension of disbelief which allows for a variety of unusual and fun gameplay environments. In a traditional flying game, or even to many arcade flying games, the majority of your gameplay is just in the air, big open space. The ground exists, there are buildings on it, and sometimes the player may need to attack it. Generally, though, the air is all you interact with, and your flight path is only dictated by the direction to which your foes travel to as well. Crimson Skies being an alternate history with fictionalized aircraft, it is not some stretch of the imagination to imagine the gameplay environments in this plane-centric world to be designed with planes to navigate them. Throughout the many maps one flies in, throughout High Road to Revenge, whether it be Sea Haven or Rixo, the Windy City, or South America, none of the environments are flat. All have a vertical terrain that not only gives the environment a visual identity, but also a navigation challenge when flying. Not only does one have to watch out for what their foes are doing, but also pay attention to where the nearest wall is. The combat area, then, is more of an arena rather than an environment. Ace Combat might have some missions where you are forced to fly in a canyon, but generally, that series still tries to produce its environments as though they are real to some extent, or maybe exist within our current reality. Crimson Skies takes no such precautions. You will be engaging in a dogfight in tight-ass city blocks, large open caves, or within a deep canyon crevasse. A flavor to combat, where one fights the opponents and the environment. Such gameplay style does get to be mildly annoying in the booby-trapped South American temple near the end of the game, but outside of that one particular moment of excruciating agony, the rest of the flying experience is a joy. Outside of combat, though, the game does drag slightly. High Road to Revenge has a pseudo-attempt at an open world, where when one is not in a mission, they can fly around and either collect tokens which assist in upgrading the aircraft, or do the seldom odd job that is either a brain-dead checkpoint race or a tedious pick up all the crates during the time limit mission. During this exploration, one can glance upon the environment and see how nicely detailed it was for 2003. However, there is certainly a disconnect between what one does in the air and what one can see on the ground. Being in a plane, it's not like one can stop and smell the roses or look closely at the environment. Even in a car racing game, one can slow down to chill and observe a city block or a tight corner. In a plane, everything is small. The NPC planes that are all taxis or civilian planes are small. The city streets are small. There is no way to pause and see it happen as an observer. The player has a mild detachment from the world at large during downtime. In a military-style game, this doesn't matter. You are on a combat mission first and foremost, and the high speed of the dogfight is what players want to see. The issue, with me, lies in the fact that Crimson Skies portrays a very politically intriguing world, where the main character, Nathan Zachary, is not some military commando or ace pilot. He is a sky pirate, traveling with his plucky band of airmen who want to drink beer and plunder loot. The brief cutscenes do offer slower moment to see what it is like to live in this bizarre alternate timeline. And the first glimpse of any environment does give a view into what living in the world must be like. But at the end of the day, Crimson Skies commits the sin of having an incredibly complex lore that can only be viewed from thousands of feet into the air. The plot itself is also rather snatched from thin air, but maybe more by design than by accident. Playing as the aforementioned character, Nathan, he is the leader of the Fortune Hunters, a band of sky pirates. Picking up where the original PC release left off, Nathan spends the game attempting to discover who killed his dear friend, Dr. Fassenbender. This leads them on a grand continental adventure, meeting many villains and visiting many locales. The plot in a general sense is on the same vibe as Indiana Jones, a cross-country adventure to stop a villain from doing something quite villainous. Except instead of using archaeological knowledge, Nathan uses amazing flying skills and violence to primarily solve his problems. Characters are generally just one-dimensional beings, such as the seductive femme fatale, evil Nazi scientist, and unusually spiritual Native American. Except, of course, for Nathan, who is a rather interesting character with his motivations and history, or at least the written backstory to him is. Before the events of the games, the man fought for the Bolsheviks during the Russian Civil War, until he realized that the Soviet Union wasn't real communism. Then he helped Russian royalty out of the country. That is but a small sample of his backstory, none of which is ever truly brought out during the plot of either the Crimson Skies games at any point. I will say it again, Crimson Skies commits an unfortunate crime of having a world that is never explored as well as its gameplay. Complete detachment from the world at large is maybe a big factor why arcade flying games were never going to take off in the public consciousness. Even compared to other vehicle-based titles, the main focus of the game is just the machine. You cannot see the people flying them. You can barely see the world below you, always perpetually moving. A cutscene will portray stakes, set the stage, but every moment one is listening to people speak. One is not actually seeing the people flying in this flying game. One could say that gameplay always matters more, but people like to see people do things, and one cannot see the person doing things when they are in a plane. Even the Ace Combat series, which is generally considered to have one of the more enjoyable flying-related stories, cannot escape the subtle feeling of detachment from the plot, compared to what is happening in the game. The game has you flying a cool plane doing daredevil tricks. The plot is a melodrama about the horrors of war in some way or another. How can you actually make a story about flying planes then, and have it be intriguing enough to have people of all walks of life enjoy it without it being incredibly dumb? Well, it seems Project Aces, the developers of Ace Combat, have already figured that out to an extent, but not within their flagship series.
Slow. That's a good boy. Not bad. I did it!
The Skycrawlers, Innocent Aces, is a movie tie-in game, but unlike many other movie tie-in games, this is actually worth playing. Based off of a novel series written by Hiroshi Muroi, Innocent Aces is actually not an adaptation of the novel. It is instead a prequel to the anime movie, simply called Skycrawlers. I have not watched the movie, nor read the novel, and I probably never will approach either. But that is okay, because even with complete and utter forceful ignorance to the source material, I still find Skycrawlers to be highly enjoyable. Being made by Project Aces, the team who makes the aforementioned silly game about the jet planes, Skycrawlers is unique in that it has no jet planes. In fact, it does not even have any air-to-air missiles. No. The ye old-fashioned way of dogfighting is what this game attempts to represent. That, of course, just being up machine guns. Keen, nerdy historians and consumers of the anime will notice, however, that this game doesn't actually take place in the ye olden days of World War II. It actually takes place in an alternate history, where instead of World War II, we have World Peace I. In this world peace, however, humanity apparently still craves violence and tension, so big corporations based in different parts of Europe stage fake wars of some sort to satiate humanity's lust for violence. For a world setup, unless it's portrayed differently in the book, that's the equivalent to Swiss cheese. They have replaced geopolitical war with corporate war, and said that is world peace. By that metric, the United States is the most peaceful place on Earth. I hold the utmost uncertainty that this world setup makes the least certain of sense. Yet, I must say that the rest of the game certainly has the most amount of fun to be had. Should any of the viewers here have played an Ace Combat game, then you are already familiar with how the plot and gameplay is intertwined in Skycrawlers. Tight and well-handling aircraft combat occurs while characters talk in your ear with very dramatic expressions that are hard to hear over the said combat. When a mission ends, you may then be treated to a cutscene with those aforementioned characters participating in a moody, over-dramatic way, maybe even a 2D image of a dog. However, since Skycrawlers is adapting an anime, which is an adaptation of a novel, all the cutscenes are just the anime, for realsies. The cutscenes are made by the same studio that animated the film. Of course, one does not actually need to have watched the film to understand this game, for the plot is rather self-contained, rather simplistic. You play as Cheetah, a silent protagonist who is the captain of Cougar Squadron, a contract pilot who works for the Rostock Air Force. What does the Rostock Air Force do? Well, they fight the other corporation, Lawtern, all as a part of the fake war or whatever the set dressing is. Throughout the events of the plot, things certainly happen. Deceit, betrayal, genetic clones of children built to fly planes for a never-ending war. You know, normal wartime issues. To be quite honest, the plot, while having an endearing level of effort worthy of observing, is not specifically the reason one plays Skycrawlers. For sure, the reason people love Ace Combat is because it is a well-constructed flying game with a whimsical Japanese plotline attached to the back. But the plot is just frosting that makes the whole cake enjoyable. Skycrawlers, Innocent Aces, is much the same, or at least it could be, had it not been exclusively on the Nintendo Wii. To play Skycrawlers on the Wii, there are many ways one could do so. The basic method of play, however, with the Wii Remote is extremely hokey. The game requests that you hold the Wiimote and the nunchuck in opposite hands, where the nunchuck would be your control stick, and the Wiimote controls your throttle. This control scheme almost worked. I almost felt like I could play the game this way. But I ran into the unfortunate fact that the Wiimote is imprecise and slow. But thankfully, Skycrawlers has GameCube controller support, so I used my cute little Mad Catz pad for the entirety of my game time. Now, the game plays exactly the same as any other Ace Combat game, aside for the fact the combat is machine gun based, not missile based, so there is a large amount of target leading. I'm amazed that such a precise variant of air combat was thought to even be feasible on a Wii Remote. I could not imagine having to vaguely flail a nunchuck around, hoping my gunfire magically appears in front of my opponent at the exact time I wanted it to. However, it seems that the developers recognized this potential control issue So the gimmick that Project Aces has implemented into this is the TMC, or Tactical Maneuver Command. In more simple terms, this is a button that simply requests that you skip to the fun part of air combat, the dogfighting, and just place yourself directly behind the opponent through a series of crackhead aerial maneuvers. Now, this command is fortunately not required to beat the game. Should you play with a pad as God intended, you could probably beat this game without using the dogfight skip button at all. Except, of course, for the fact that using the TMC is required for max ranks in the missions. So in order to be an expert skycrawler, you must fast master the art of spamming the same button to have the game play itself. Except, of course, I lied again. Even if you don't care about score, this button is almost mandatory in certain missions, particularly boss fights, as the opponents decide to always be just outside of the crosshairs of your guns unless you cheat and do a vertical 720-degree pirouette behind them. Tactical combat indeed. To play devil's advocate, however, maybe this command was added simply because machine gun-based target leading is more difficult than having the enemy vaguely in your periphery and just spamming lock-on missiles. To speed up the gameplay, the devs just decided to add a method to remove it. I tried my best to avoid using it, and thoroughly had a pleasant experience doing so. The only Ace Combat game I have ever played is the 7th one, and I liked it well enough to buy some of the others and never play them. This is first and foremost because I cannot escape the subtle and incomprehensible feeling that video games are a waste of the finite amount of time I have on this earth. But second is because I'm not a crazy fan of jet aircraft. My autistic hyperfixation of aircraft has always been more on the side of planes with propellers, not the black magic jet engines. So the thought of playing an entire series of flying games with jet engine aircraft is not crazy appealing to me. This is of course why in this video I am going out of my way to talk about the niche Wii-only Ace Combat anime spin-off game with fictionalized World War II aircraft instead of any other Ace Combat game that would likely get this video more views. But hey, the aircraft in this game are pretty cool. Considerably more grounded in their designs compared to Crimson Skies. If one were told that these aircraft were prototypes from the Second World War, you could be easily fooled. This is in strong contrast to said Crimson Skies, where the aircraft designs are fantastical and the main design process of them is similar to the phrase, "Yeah, the wings can go there, fuck it." A more reasonably accurate aircraft design certainly complements a more grounded and philosophical story, something that Skycrawlers attempts to convey. Although there is still a great deal of difficulty in telling a story about people and their lives when most of the events take place within flying death machines thousands of feet in the air. I've said it before in past videos, and as well as this exact video, but people enjoy seeing people do things. If any game places more focus on the machine, like a racing game or a flying game, well then you may have effectively marketed to people who may only enjoy that particular vehicle. Car people will generally be the only ones to play a racing game, and people who enjoy aircraft may be the only ones who play a flying game. In the current video game market, where games have somehow become absurdly expensive, leaving any potential demographic left out could mean your game does not make any money. In simpler terms, playing games are too niche to make all the money in the world, and that is why the genre is dead in the mainstream, leaving only indies or budget games carrying the torch for single-player flying games. Shame, really, as it means fans of the arcade flying genre will basically be stuck playing old games for the considerable future, talking about how good things used to be, much like Need for Speed fans. Back in the 2000s, arcade flying games were big. High-budget simcade flyers like Ace Combat, low-budget simcade flyers that were clones of Ace Combat, pick-up-and-play games such as Crimson Skies, terrible games like Blazing Angels, or really unusual budget games like Wings of War. This is a World War I flying game only on the Xbox or the PC, and my god, it's jank. And not very historically accurate in the slightest, odd for a historical flying game. Pilots communicate with radios, which a World War I aircraft did not have. But even more bizarre are these moments where you must jump from aircraft to aircraft. Wacky shit. If my autistic hyperfixation was in World War I, this would make me very mad. But fortunately, I am somewhat normal. I do not get mad when the video game displays something mildly historically inaccurate, although I do appreciate it when the game gets things right. And there is no game that better mixes arcade with historical accuracy than Heroes of the Pacific.
This Tojo just won't die. Confirmed kill on that bomber.
Heroes of the Pacific is one of the best World War II flying games ever. Full stop. When this was released in 2005 on PC and consoles, we all did not realize that this was actually as good as it was ever gonna get. The most sobering fact to this is that the game still isn't at all perfect. Yet, to start, we shall explain what makes this game great, and the foremost aspect to this game's greatness is the vibe. Should anyone have ever taken a glance at 1940s advertisements, whether it be consumer products or wartime propaganda, Heroes of the Pacific rather accurately and with great joy mimics that art style. The menu is simultaneously colorful and washed out. Bombastic orchestral music plays as you look over which war machine you decide to fly. The aesthetic of a game menu is often underappreciated, because most people would rather their focus be fixated on the focal point of playing the game. Many a modern game has a boring menu system designed to just navigate you from page to page without any enjoyment from being in it. That is in nowhere the case for this game. Every menu has a period-correct, hand-drawn type of art style going on, and every menu option has a little blurb written in verbiage that is not too dissimilar from how an advertisement would have been written within wartime America. The menu system is also carried over into the presentation of the aircraft, which does a rather excellent job of making every plane seem really cool. The menu has an action shot of the plane flying in front of a unique background, a catchphrase representative of its performance, and a little blurb that is representative of nothing. Suffice to say, Heroes of the Pacific does not waste time giving you a taste of the level of historical accuracy they at least attempt to achieve, even though at the end of the day it is just an arcade flying game. To best describe how flying in this game feels, it is less realistic than Ace Combat, but certainly more complex than Crimson Skies. There are no goofy aerial maneuvers one can do, but one can discern the difference between aircraft. The Zero handles like a feather, the Thunderbolt does not. The Lightning is better suited to strafing than it is dogfighting, and the ME-262 has spectacular speed, but poor handling. Arcade representation of how these aircraft would have been handled in reality, game balance at work. Aside, of course, for the Black Widow, which is the most overpowered plane in the game and is almost mandatory to use for getting the Ace rank pilot. That is a small price to pay, however, because the aircraft diversity is so great, you wouldn't want to stick with one plane for long. Diversity of gameplay is high, or about as high as one can keep a World War II game dedicated to keeping a reasonable suspension of disbelief. Unlike Crimson Skies or Ace Combat, Heroes of the Pacific only takes place in real locations, and unlike the ever-loathsome Blazing Angels, the location one flies in is actually representative of what the actual location looks like IRL. Pearl Harbor looks like Pearl Harbor, Iwo Jima looks like Iwo Jima, and I am told that the ocean here looks like the ocean in real life. Nowadays, that is to be expected, but for a console game of this era, it's rather impressive. Taking place in the Pacific, there is a lot of island hopping, recreating important historical battles in the Pacific War against the Japanese. There is a plot with characters, but to tell you up front, the plot is just there to give a face and a personality to the game, not much else. In fact, I will tell you the plot right now. You are William Crow, a dude from Bumblefuck Cornland, America. You join the military with your brother. Your brother dies during the December 7th Pearl Harbor attack. And then you spend the game vaguely plotting revenge against a made-up group of Japanese aces who supposedly were there during the attack. At times, there is a boss fight against them, and in the end, you defeat the last one of them, and then William Crow apparently gets his revenge. Nonsense plot. And it seems the developers, Transmission Games, We're aware of this because after every cutscene of the plot in this game, there is then an immediate cutscene that plays, showing actual war footage, describing to the player the historical result of the battle you just digitally participated in, and then why the US Navy traveled to the next island, which is of course a shuttle to the next chapter of the game. The better one performs in any given mission, the more upgrade points received, which can be used to upgrade the aircraft within the game. However, the upgrade system is not just stat boosts. It actually visually changes the aircraft. What's cooler is that the aircraft upgraded becomes its historically higher revision. For example, the P-51 Mustang, upon unlocking, is the early version, the P-51A, with the canopy enclosed in the rear. Yet, should one upgrade the craft to the max, it is now the P-51D, which has the bubble canopy. All of the aircraft in the game get this treatment. An upgrade not only makes the craft better to use, but is also visually representative of how it may have been improved during the war. Oddly though, the max upgrade for the Zero is just the kamikaze version. I'm not sure what that was attempting to apply. Also, before I move any farther, I should say that the gameplay one is witnessing through your eyeballs is maybe the 20th time I have played this game since I was 8 or 9 years old. So I have unlocked everything aside for this. After the first playthrough of the game, the player is allowed to pick whatever plane they want to use in subsequent playthroughs, which is why a Japanese Val is attacking the Musashi super battleship. Getting back to the point, you may wonder why I've bothered to bring up historical accuracy in a game that is rather obviously an arcade flyer with arcade elements and arcade plot. This is simply because Heroes of the Pacific achieves a perfect symbiosis of arcade playable without degrading the historical events. For every goofy boss battle there is, another 3 missions are a condensed, historically significant moment from the Pacific. Was there actually a dude named William Crowe who was a one-man fucking aerial army against the Japanese Imperial Navy? No! But through the lens of this larger-than-life pilot, someone who may not have actually known too much about the war in the Pacific would actually now have a rather good idea of how things went down. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the loss of Wake Island, the decisive battle of Midway, the long trudge through the smaller Pacific islands, all on a warpath to capture the strategic island of Iwo Jima from the Japanese. The only mission to break the historically arcadey suspension of disbelief is a convoluted mission in the Philippines section of the game. It is an attempt to capture a German Me-262 being tested by the Japanese, to which you somehow do end up stealing it, and then get involved in a boss fight against a German pilot who also happens to be there. Me describing this mission to you, the viewer, may sound preposterous, but trust me when I say this mission is the exception rather than the rule. It seems more or less just to be a thinly veiled reason to have the Me-262 in the game, even though the Kika would have been a more esoteric choice. Could the general inaccuracies that this game carries be held against it? Well, I guess that depends on who you are. To people who make their second job being reading Wikipedia, no, they will never be satisfied. For those wishing for a simplified arcade flyer in the Pacific, though, I do really find this as the best option. Battle Stations Pacific and Birds of Steel are also flying games that take place in the said ocean, but I find these titles are not designed in any way to be used with a controller, particularly Birds of Steel. Regardless, unless you want to play Looney Tunes flying game, jank shit, or some particular missions in Secret Weapons over Normandy, Heroes of the Pacific is basically the best choice. And it came out 20 years ago. For 20 years, your best arcade single-player flying game in the Pacific Theater was this, and to be honest, it's not all that perfect. The difficulty is whack, and game balance is questionable. Looking at the positives, though, one cannot help but love the game. The level of love that went into the art design, attention to detail when it comes to the aircraft selection, and effectively touring the player through the Pacific War in a respectful enough manner to not degrade the efforts of the men who were actually there, is overall commendable for an arcade title. The fact I do have to come and defend this game for its arcade playstyle is probably the reason why there are so few historical arcade flyers out there nowadays. That is simply because when one sets any form of media during known historical events, there is an immediate level of scrutiny on not only your game, but also on how well you represent that period. You could bastardize it for the sake of easy access, similar to some of the missions in Battlefield 5, or you could rigidly attempt to recount it in something like Birds of Steel, but then create a high barrier of entry for the skill department. A middle ground ends up being a jack of all trades, where people unfamiliar with the topic need to be entertained with the title as a game, while also teaching those said people about the events, while also letting people familiar with the topic know that the devs did their research. A difficult balance to take. But Heroes of the Pacific, at least to my subjectively objective opinion, does bridge this gap about as well as possible. And before you ask, no, I haven't played the sequel. The arcade flying genre is dead. But who has killed it? Well, mass market appeal has. Game publishers want to not just make a lot of money, they need all of the money. The best way to do that is to make a shooting or stabbing game that has either a third or first-person perspective. I'm not even being hyperbolic. Look at the top-selling games most years. They are in either of those perspectives, involving primarily being on foot and have you shooting or stabbing. The game most popular with the children is a cartoonish rendition of war, where their favorite superheroes are using a cartoonish rendition of real firearms, and then they do a little dance when they kill each other. If your game is not any of those things, it might as well be niche. Unless you are Nintendo or a Japanese dev. A genre involving anything other than direct human-on-human violence is for some reason becoming increasingly less popular. Games with vehicles are niche now. You may think I'm full of shit, but it's true. EA just inadvertently said Need for Speed is dead, so then what other AAA arcade racing games exist? On the flying side, outside of Ace Combat, what is actually another single-player arcade flyer that exists of comparable quality today? Independent and smaller developers with personal passions will always keep genres alive, but to see a racing game or a flying game with any amount of money put into it like a modern AAA is no longer to be seen, or at least not with regularity. An unfortunate state to the games industry it is. Every game show I wait with bated breath for a new adventure that does not immediately involve a man holding a gun, and each time I am met with a game with a man holding a gun. This sounds like a negative take on the current state of the games industry, and it is. Luckily, I have other hobbies, so I am not in a perpetual dour mood as someone who plays War Thunder for the 1000th hour is. That being said, I would love nothing more than to see a Crimson Sky sequel during the next Xbox show. Or would I? As it would most likely be a live service game, which would only dour my mood again. Stay positive, though. Thanks for watching.